Hey, what is going on, guys? This is SMEB Reviews, and today we are interrupting my regularly scheduled album reviews to do something a little different, and we are doing it with my good friend Tom from TomQPublic. Say hey, Tom.
Hi, I'm TomQPublic of Tom's Hit Parade, and on my channel I like to talk casually about everything I love about music, whether it's reviewing my favorite albums of the past and present, or discussing notable monthly album anniversaries and spotlighting classic albums on vinyl in backtracks, or digging for buried CD treasures in my monthly bargain bag feature, or talking about occasionally music-related DVDs or books, or other miscellaneous whatnots.
Today we will be doing our top 3 Billy Joel albums. Originally we considered ranking his whole discography, but that would have been impossible with our plethora of opinions on Billy Joel and his music. So instead we decided just to talk about the top 3. We will take turns talking about which albums we find better. He'll go with his third, then my third, his second, my second, until we get to both of our final picks. So, Tom, tell us about some of your history with Billy Joel.
Thanks, Noah, and thanks for inviting me in on this one. Now, I first became familiar with Billy Joel the way that most 80s kids did. It was by hearing his songs on the radio. But I was never a huge fan of his growing up. There were really just a few artists back then who enthralled me enough to get me to buy their albums, although I did like pretty much every Billy Joel song that I heard on the radio. And I did eventually buy his first Greatest Hits compilation before the 80s were over. But in the last few years, I've started an in-depth exploration of the discographies of several artists that I've enjoyed. It was a yearning, I guess, that had been building for a while to dig beyond the greatest hits, and I had picked up actually one of his albums just before I befriended you and found out that you were such a big fan, and well, that was pretty much all the convincing that I needed to dive into the proverbial deep end. Now, very quickly before I turn it back over to you, I just wanted to quickly mention my number 5 favorite Billy Joel album, Streetlife Serenade, and that's for its almost whimsical variety of sounds, everything from a ragtime instrumental to a highly satirical snipe at the record industry on The Entertainer. And my number 4 favorite album of his, Glass Houses, and that's mainly just because it has some of my favorite singles on it. Don't Ask Me Why, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, and You May Be Right. And it also has a song in French, and I'm kind of partial to songs in French. So anyway, back over to you. How did you get involved in Billy Joel's music, and what are your number 5 and number 4 favorite albums?
I absolutely love Billy Joel. Billy Joel's actually probably the second artist I dug into after the Beatles, and I really fell in love with everything I heard. I got into him because I knew a bunch of radio singles, and I started listening to more of his stuff, and the first album of his I really listened to all the way through was Glass Houses over here. An absolutely great album, and I really enjoyed what I was hearing. He knows how to make so many different styles of music. But never does it seem like he's selling out or trying to ditch some artistic vision. It's more just an evolving with the times and trying to create something new, and I've always really appreciated all of his different phases of his career. He's made some really excellent music, and I absolutely love every one of his albums. I don't really feel that he has any missteps, maybe some that are weaker, but no real missteps. So I'm absolutely stoked that I get to actually talk about Billy Joel. Now, as for my honorable mentions, my number 5 pick is going to be Piano Man. It's a great album, and it really took what he had on Cold Spring Harbor and just perfected it. Cold Spring Harbor was not a bad album, but it was his first album, and it had some weak songs and some weak songwriting. Piano Man takes that and makes it way better. Just look at Captain Jack, the single that actually was more successful over Piano Man at the time of the release. Piano Man blew up later. At the time, Captain Jack was more successful, and it's a really good song. Not to say it's better than Piano Man. Both are excellent songs, but both are such great storytelling sort of songs. They really do sound amazing. And there's so many other great songs. Traveling Prayer, Ballad of Billy the Kid. This is a very diverse and interesting album that I absolutely love. My number 4 pick is actually going to be River of Dreams. River of Dreams is a great album. It is his final pop album that he released, at least as of now. And it's a great piece of media. I absolutely love every single song. Famous Last Words is the final track on this album. And it just, every time I hear it, it's haunting to me. Because he says that these are the last words I have to say, and while he's remained in the public light, toured, and he did make a more classical style album, he stopped writing pop music. And I think that him knowing that he was done, he had said all he needed to say, and then he just stepped away. It's poetic, and it's a really haunting song listening to it now, so many years after its release. I absolutely love it. So let's get on to the top 3 albums for both Tom and I. Tom, what's your number 3 pick?
Thanks, Noah, and that's a good start to your list, by the way. My number 3 favorite Billy Joel album is River of Dreams. Now, in my opinion, Billy Joel's later albums are criminally overlooked, mostly due to their comparative lack of hit singles, especially this one, his last, as of now, pop rock album. Now, for me, the reason it's number 3 on my list is because I think it's one of his most dynamic albums. I mean, not only do we get some Clapton-esque blues on the song A Minor Variation, and then the almost Genesis-like prog rock sort of stuff on Shades of Grey, but there are also some throwbacks to his earlier sounds, like both the softer piano stylings with Lullaby, Goodnight My Angel, and the more Glass Houses style rock on the opening track No Man's Land. But he even tries his hand at 60s blue-eyed soul with the very Roy Orbison reminiscent track Blonde Over Blue. That's probably my second favorite song on the album, as well as my favorite, the positively gorgeous gospel pop of the title track. And it's an all-time favorite of mine, probably because, among many reasons, it was a favorite of my sister's. And it just, to this day, every time I hear it, it gives me goosebumps. I just absolutely love it. So, yeah, in terms of the breadth of sounds, more than any other reason, you can't get much better than River of Dreams. So, what's your number 3 pick?
That's really funny that your number 3 pick was my number 4 pick, because my number 3 pick was your number 4 pick. My number 3 pick is Glass Houses, an absolutely incredible album. Man, I love this thing all the way through. I think that it is so incredibly upbeat, catchy, and fun. All for Lena is one track that I really like to throw out first because it has such great synth work. This album really blends a more rock style with the new wave sound that he was talking about in Still Rock and Roll to Me, one of his most successful songs of all time. It's him taking his sound and still incorporating the new sounds, what people are doing, without really selling out. He's just putting his own spin on things, and that's how it should be. If he wanted to make something new and something that may have been a little different. So he did, and he put his own flair on it, and I absolutely love what he did here. As I said, the main thing to say here is that this album is fun. It's enjoyable. It's a great listen. From front to back, every song is great. Sometimes a fantasy, an absolutely hilarious song detailing him having phone sex. It's fun, it's playful, and that's the highlight. That's what makes this entire album so incredibly good, is that it's just enjoyable. Billy Joel sounds like he's having fun, and as an audience, it's a great album to put on and listen to. And there's a reason why he still plays a lot of songs from this album in his live shows. What's your number 2 pick, Tom?
That's a great choice for number 3. It was my number 4 pick, obviously. And you did make some great points with that. It is a very fun album indeed, and I do have to agree with you, in particular, with the catchiness of All for Lena. It was one of my favorite tracks on the album, definitely. As for my runner-up favorite Billy Joel album, it would have to be An Innocent Man. Now, I was tempted to put this album in my number 1 spot, and I did, in fact, swap the two of them back and forth a few times, but something, perhaps an aversion to being thought of as predictable or lazy, kept me from putting what was arguably his most commercial album in the top spot. But commerciality is nothing to be ashamed of, and certainly this album is not either. Billy grew up listening to doo-wop and soul and the brill building and Motown stylings that he slathered this album with, and if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then the artists who originated those sounds had to have been tremendously flattered, because when you imitate something as beautifully and flawlessly as he did with this album, it's something you obviously have a deep and abiding affection for. The chart success of the album's biggest tracks, the spot-on soul of Uptown Girl, the doo-wop perfection of The Longest Time, that's quite possibly my favorite track on the album. And the toe-tapping Motown salute, Tell Her About It, those are a testament to not just Billy Joel's talent, but the timelessness of the sounds he was paying tribute to. I mean, they still sound totally at home on the radio today, as if they could have been recorded 3 months ago instead of 3 decades ago. But this album was not a one-dimensional nostalgia pastiche, as the title track and the closing songs, Leave a Tender Moment Alone and Keeping the Faith, those tracks bring across enough of Billy Joel's signature sound to make it uniquely enjoyable in its own right. Now, Billy says he felt like a teenager again when he recorded this album, and in my opinion, it definitely comes through in its sound. So, Noah, what's your runner-up?
Just some fun anecdotes. You mentioned Longest Time. Actually, I, at one point, tried to organize a group of people to sing this song a cappella. Never came through, but it was something I worked on. Final anecdote is that also in Keeping the Faith, the lyrics, the good old days weren't always good and tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems, was actually my senior quote in high school. So, little fun anecdote about that album as a whole. So my turn for my number 2. My number 2, before I even recorded this, before we even started working on this video, I knew what my top 2 were. They'd been set in stone for a long time for me. My number 2 is actually Turnstiles. Turnstiles is an excellent album. Billy Joel's never really been an artist to sit still for too long. He does like to move around and create a lot of different sounds. I've already mentioned that. But here, for the first 5 albums, he had a fairly defined sound. I'd say that he pretty much stuck to what he was doing with that piano pop style. And here, I feel like is where he mastered it. Yeah, a lot of people like to point to The Stranger as one of the better, or as him mastering this style, but when I hear this album, I just connect with it way more. The songwriting seems way more creative to me, and honestly, I will say that I may have had some listener's fatigue listening to The Stranger, because I've just heard some of those singles so many times, and while they are really good, I think that could be some of my problem, in that I just cannot listen to The Stranger all the way through sometimes because of some of those songs I've just heard so many times, like Only the Good Die Young. But never has that happened with this album. Prelude, Angry Young Man. I've always been so impressed with the piano on Prelude. I know that it's not necessarily the most difficult thing in the world, but the speed that he plays it, and watching him play it live has always fascinated me. Just watching his hands be able to play that. Angry Young Man, like I said, still a great song. Miami 2017 is probably one of my favorite Billy Joel songs of all time. This post-apocalyptic sort of song about just playing music and going on with the show even after they're shut down. It's such a good song. It's post-apocalyptic. It's based off of what Billy Joel saw in his real life and how he thought that the world may be going. It's such an interesting song. Say Goodbye to Hollywood, another great song. And New York State of Mind is that quintessential jazz-inspired Billy Joel sound that works so incredibly well for him. This album is just so consistently great to me. I feel like so much of it has so much power and is so creative. Never does he really get stuck on an old stale formula here. It's always new, always fresh, and there's some new idea at every turn. This album is incredible, and the fact that I can praise this album so much, it worries me, because how am I going to properly put into words my number 1 pick? But before I get ahead of myself, let's hear Tom's number 1 pick. Take it, Tom.
Now, this is why I find these collaboration videos so interesting. You hear things that I don't hear or have a hard time catching, and I'm sure the opposite can probably be true as well. Now, while I can't argue about the strength of his songwriting on that album, for some reason Turnstiles has just never held a huge amount of allure for me. I don't know why. But it is interesting that you should mention The Stranger, because that is my favorite Billy Joel album. Now, he arguably shines brightest when he sinks his musical teeth into those long, luxurious, intricately detailed story songs, and in my opinion, there's no better example of this than in my favorite album of his, The Stranger. We have the 7.5-minute suite, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, which chronicles the slow breakdown of a romantic relationship, and the psychological study of the title track, which talks about how we all have a mask that we hide behind and present as ourselves to the outside world, while the person underneath is quite different. And that contrast is even brought across in the music within that song, which starts out as a plaintive, sad whistle in the subdued opening before breaking into a solid funk for the main body of the song, after which it outros with the same almost mournful quality it began with. That could very well be my favorite song on the album. But we also have some of the more conventionally structured radio-friendly tracks like Just the Way You Are and Only the Good Die Young and She's Always a Woman, all of them classics for very good reason. I also enjoy the jazz overtones of the opener, Movin' Out, as well as the blend of the Stevie Wonderish funk with a bossa nova kind of a beat of Get It Right the First Time. I really like that one. Now, I can understand how it might give you and other listeners ear fatigue, but in terms of songcraft, in my opinion, The Stranger is Billy Joel at his finest. Okay, I'm ready, Noah. What's your number one?
Hey, there is a great reason why The Stranger is typically considered one of Billy Joel's best albums, and even one of the best albums of all time. I don't at all blame you for that pick. It is a great album. But it's not my number one pick. My number one pick is Nylon Curtain. I love Nylon Curtain, and I know it's not necessarily the most talked about album, which fascinates me, honestly. Billy Joel even cites it usually as his favorite album that he's made, typically because of how much creative freedom he had with it. He really spent a lot of time with this album in the studio, experimenting with different sounds and working out new ways to make his music interesting. And it really does come through here. Sometimes that long process in the studio can really take an album down as people get too focused on the minute details and don't focus on bigger problems that they may not even be seeing, but it is not present here. This album, it may be a short track listing, but man, does it pack a lot of power into each song. Allentown is one of the most successful songs that have ever captured just the plight of the typical blue-collar American worker. It's a great song, and it's absolutely, it has that perfect amount of Americana feel while still being extremely catchy. Then we have one of the most heart-wrenching tributes to the armed services with Goodbye Saigon. It's an incredible track that was fortunate enough to see live, and it is absolutely moving live. It is an incredible song that Billy Joel just did such a good job on. Every part of this song works so well. And during the And We Will All Go Down Together part, I cannot hear that part and just not tear up. It's an excellent song. I may have only talked about 2 songs, but there are so many more. Pressure is an excellent synth-led song. Where's the Orchestra? A really slow, contemplative sort of song that really just has a lot of little wit to it that Billy Joel is excellent at. Laura, another really catchy song that's packed in this album, and the list goes on. Every song in this album is perfect. I love this album. It has been my favorite since I heard it the day I first listened to it. This was one that I didn't really know about because nobody talks about Nylon Curtain. Then I eventually found this, and I fell in love with it from the first listen. It is a great, great album, and I cannot talk highly enough about it. But instead of just going on and on, I'll just cut it short here. Take it away, Tom. Say your goodbyes.
A very good choice for number one, I have to say. I actually did enjoy the single Allentown off that album, and Pressure is another one of my all-time favorite Billy Joel singles. It's an enjoyable album for sure, as all Billy Joel albums are, but not quite in my top 5, I have to say. That was a great list of yours, and I had a lot of fun doing this. A whole lot of fun. Thank you so much again, Noah, for bringing me in on this.
Thank you guys so incredibly much for watching this video. It really does mean a lot to both of us. We worked really hard on this, and we have been spending a lot of time thinking about this project. So getting this to a point where it can see the light of day is very exciting. I'm ready for us to show you guys. Thank you, Tom, for joining me. Thank you for all your hard work on this video. And to all of our viewers, please tell us what you thought about this list and what your list is, because as you can see, we had very different lists with only 2 overlapping albums. Everyone has very different opinions, and both Tom and I had very different takes on what the best Billy Joel albums were, so you please tell us. Also, go check out Tom. Tom deserves it. He is a great YouTuber that makes excellent content. If you like that personality they presented, it's what he does in all of his videos. Go check him out. He absolutely deserves it. Thank you guys for clicking on this video. It really does mean a lot to us. We'll see you guys later.